through this theory a little bit with depression. You ready? Okay. I'm going to try to do this. This is kind of part two of deeper healing theory, especially somewhat as it relates to depression. Um, but I want to try to throw out some other deeper theories. So last week we kind of talked about this, um, the need to wrap our head around or just embrace that there's duality, right? So I think we walked through that pretty well, right? So I was thinking about this today too, because somebody I saw like, go through a depressive episode, but this is kind of like the nature of it. Um, a lot of it is when we talk about duality too, we're kind of talking double speak, and that's kind of hard for people, right? So, for example, like in Chinese theory, there's the idea that, to live a healthy life, they say you should have your head in the clouds and your feet on the earth. That's duality, right? Does everybody get that? So we have our head in the clouds, which is very yang, right? Very upward and expansive, meaning we're trying to, it's symbolic of being living with high ideals and living in a really spiritually, emotionally balanced place, coming at things from like that perspective. But at the same time, having our feet on the earth and truly planted, meaning practical. So we see this, a lot of people get into lifelong depression because they're too extreme in one or the other, right? They're either like too practical and we would say probably pessimistic, track into negative thinking and become too practical. Um, if you talk to a lot of people who say they've lost their spiritual connection, this is what usually comes out of their mouth at the same time. They've lost their inspiration. They're just practical. Um, at the same time, some people are so in their head that they can't function in normal life also, and it creates a great deal of challenges, right? They're living in their head and they're living in maybe an inspired state, but they're not having a lot of practical application. And that's creating a lot of stress, drama, and kind of depression in their life. So I mean, another way of looking at that is this duality of being okay with having a little bit of both. If we're feeling depressed or like we're in a depressive, maybe just phase of life, examining, are we doing both of those things at once, and how do we harmonize them, right? Does that make sense? um, a lot of people often say that are really spiritual that they feel like they're in a battle with the ego and the spirit. That's a different way of saying it, right? They're trying to live this very spiritually inspired life, but their ego is also trying to survive and right, our ego wants to live. That's just a different way of kind of saying it and just trying to embrace that. I think just understanding that that's just part of the human experience. The better we can embrace that, then we can start to play with it more, right? We can kind of navigate that a little bit more, not be so hard on ourselves one way or another. But this duality shows up in this concept that I kind of call reset, which is part of often how people get out of their depression too. So reset is If we go deep into the theory of natural medicine, I think it's actually, we're always moving through the 6 tissue states. We're always kind of changing and moving through them, kind of like a medicine wheel of life. But a lot of times we will see people who, for whatever reason, right, just by sometimes their own choice, but usually this just happens to happen. It's, in my opinion, it's the Constitution orchestrating something. And reset is where people kind of go into this reset zone. Does everybody know what I'm talking about by that? I think a lot of cultures honor this, where you would probably feel this and you would be allowed to go off into the wilderness or go on a vision quest by yourself or some kind of rite of passage where you would be able to go, you know, away by yourself to be with your kind of thoughts, like a retreat or silent retreat or spiritual retreat, or, you know, traveling the world on foot and coming home eventually, a different person, this. But how we see this happen with people, like in a day-to-day basis, is sometimes people, they're resetting and they don't know it. Often a reset will happen after a huge activity in life. So this is following yin yang theory, right? We have all this activity, stress, build up, exert. We don't think, we don't really feel. We're just like trying to get through it. And then the event is over, or we retire, or the kids graduate, or something. And then, a couple weeks later, there's this reset that happens. Um, Sometimes this just happens in life through stages. Sometimes it happens from counseling. This always happens during the healing process, by the way. There is a phase. Remember when we talked about adrenal healing? There's a phase that people go through where I said it's like a bear in a cave. This is kind of happening to people. What's interesting though about this is really real and it's really a tissue state and you can feel it. We can identify it. I've gotten so good at feeling this in patients' pulse alone. You can tell when they're resetting because what happens is their pulses completely feel like they've zeroed out. Like when your internet doesn't work and you're frustrated and finally you just unplug it. And then magically, when you unplug it in a couple minutes, it's back in there. Reset, like a bear going into a cave to hibernate for the year and reemerge like a different person. So what happens is people's energy goes inward typically. So they become a little bit kind of, they're wanting to, they might not honor it, but be a little more reclusive, a little more quiet, a little less sociable. This looks like depression to a lot of people, right? To maybe someone's husband or wife or family or coworkers, like this could look like depression sometimes too. That's why I want to talk about it. People can become quiet. People are often challenged with really deep existential ideas. Like this lady today is like, what are we doing? What am I doing here? What are we doing with our work together? Like, what are we, like very deep questioning of just their own life, our own lives. This would be called like a midlife crisis, would look like this, but it might be a little messier looking, right? This could just be a little phase of life. Um, People tend to really feel very confused because I think as Americans, we're not used to talking about this. We're not okay with feeling uncomfortable, withdrawn, trying to really work through some thoughts. We just don't have a culture of supporting it. I mean, some people might, depending on their culture or whatever support systems they have. So, but the pulses actually, you can't feel them. They literally disappear. All the pulses become, I say, like quiet, like something is zeroed out. So, especially when they're in it, typically last a couple weeks to a couple months, at least as far as like the intense feelings of it. You can feel it building in the pulse and you can feel it when it's there, just like a wave that's crashed, right? That's the yang. Now the wave's receding and the ocean's getting ready to go again. It's very much part of like yin yang theory. People kind of become a little bit, it's a relaxed tissue state. That's why the pulse like kind of clears out. So people kind of get a little bit, might seem a little depressed because they just don't care about a lot of stuff. They start to not care as much about things that, aren't important, but they also just don't care as much about a lot of stuff. And it looks maybe like depression or uncaringness, right? But it's just really the body and the mind retooling itself. And people do reemerge from it. But like we've talked about with depression and change, when we reemerge a different person, that shakes up everything around us, right? All of our social networks get a little bit like, whoa, what's going on with Nicholas here? Like, didn't see him for like a couple months. Now he's talking a little bit different, like, or maybe he doesn't want to hang out with me all of a sudden now, or maybe you want to hang out with someone else. When we go through these resets, the goal what the Constitution is trying to organize is like a growth phase, right? It's like a growth phase. But this is like the mechanics of it as we go through this, like after the wave has crashed, everything retreats and it gets very quiet. So when people are in this, anger will happen often because they don't know what to think or do about this, but people will often feel depressed and sad and very deep life, society, deep thoughts that like this person today was just like, why is there so much suffering in the world? I can't get over it. And there is, there is a lot of suffering. Um, she just during in this kind of cocoon phase in that what we tell people to do. Does everybody feel like you can recognize this? You felt this yourself, you've seen this in people, but you can also see this in people's symptoms, their energy drops, right? Their filter starts to drop a little bit, your speaking filter. Either you don't want to talk or you maybe tend to like start to get triggered a little bit. Because historically, when this happens, you're supposed to be kind of like alone and quiet. So when people are in this phase, we advise them to not be in crowds, to not be around a bunch of negativity. Don't be at like yelling sporting events. Don't be in like huge rock concerts with 30,000 people because your energetics of your body become very sensitive when you're zeroed out. It's like the whole system's recalibrating and any input is like really difficult. This is where we should be having people do Tai Chi and yoga and prayer and contemplation and meditation and really like latch on to whatever it is, that's religious or spiritual or emotional healing to them, whatever that is for them. This is like the time to kind of like really go into that a little bit more. It's time to journal. It's a time to, you know, just kind of pause, reset. The challenge is like a wave crashing and then retreating, here comes the other wave building, right? So as soon as you come out of this hibernation, there's a little bit of intensity behind it. So you go through another rapid change, which is really not a change, it's just integration of what you just did. And this is where I said coworkers can get thrown off by this. Remember, one of the most difficult parts of healing is not ourselves. It is us allowing us to heal in the way that we need to heal. That's one of the biggest challenges of healing because we don't allow ourselves to heal in the way that we know is best for us or right. And what we're morphing into, we can't often have enough confidence to just morph into that which we know is really us because we're, again, too worried about what people think, too worried about what people are going to say, if our family is going to reject us, or our friends with the new us. So this is like always touches with depression. There's always like phases of this. And this is like often looks depressed, or people can go through a kind of like a depressive like episode, but it's very transient though. That's the good thing about it too. And natural. It's very natural. We're all going through this occasionally. Oftentimes this is brought on by death of a loved one, right? Coming of age processes or retirements and bigger events like that will do this, but this is happening to all of us on some level at some point. Usually every couple of years, everybody goes through one of these resets. So, okay. So think of it as the body being energetically neutral. And you want it to be that way for a little bit, like cocoon and cave up a little bit. And then we can go back to being super sociable and things like that. But it's a very impressionable time. I really think the mind probably actually rewires some with what we know about neuroplasticity. I'm sure the brain is actually rewiring some, and all kinds of interesting things are happening. But the other thing that I want you to remember about this is, remember, the Constitution has its own mind, it just guides our body and life. And it just sometimes puts us here, whether we want it or not, whether we're ready for it or not, for whatever reason, it just puts us here sometimes. Sometimes life puts us here. The ultimate goal of all of this reset, though, like we've talked about with depression, the ultimate goal is really only one thing, is the whole reason this is happening. That is our authentic self. So when people are in the reset, they're going to feel tired. They're going to feel fatigued, just like the adrenal kind of healing phase, right? They're going to feel quiet. They're going to feel very introspective, probably thinking about deeper things in their life and processing, um, not seeming to care about a lot of other stuff or as much interaction with others. And this is just temporary. But the goal of this, what the Constitution is doing, it's just another layer of authentic self trying to emerge. And it's happening, right? This is what our Constitution is doing. It is trying to help our authentic self reemerge through this transformation a little bit more each time we do this, a little bit more. That's why I always say every time I've been through like a big stress or trauma, I say, okay, I'm through it. Okay. What part of my authentic self, what part of my authentic self was sharpened or reemerged? What am I changing now? That's like a great question. That's what I asked this person today. Okay, this is happening. We know your authentic self's trying to emerge, but what are you changing? What are you changing? What's going to be different now? You can, I think, to a degree. Yeah. So you can, and I think a lot of cultures, this is, yeah, like they have processes in place historically, and a lot of cultures still do this. But in America, like American culture, we don't necessarily have this, you know.
Would that be
We often call it a midlife crisis because people ignore this for so long, then it just melts down, it like crashes out. Yeah.
For like a Christian retreat, would
Yeah,
that
sure. Yeah. And a lot of
help?
religions would have retreat, a lot of religions value silent retreats or retreats where you're just getting away from your life, going inside, right? Contemplate your life, yourself, your authentic self, your connection to everything. So, most definitely. So, it's really cool. But this happens with patients. I see it all the time. I try to educate people about it. Some people, it just kind of goes over their head. So often people become very non-intimate at this phase too. They'll go through a phase where you just don't want to be like touched. You don't want to be intimate. Just it's kind of like an inward rewiring, you know? Okay. So everybody does know the goal, like of all these traumas, right? Each time we go through them, or these reset phases, or these healing phases, whatever we want to call them, breaks we take, the whole goal that we want to focus on is what part of our authentic self are we recapturing or cultivating or bringing out to our life now? How are we going to do that? How are we going to support this? Questions?
Is there a point at which it goes on too long?
I think a lot of people do intentionally drag this on too long because I think a lot of people that are very cerebral or get like paralyzed in thinking processes sometimes can drag this on too long or get kind of stuck in it a little bit. Like they're caught in the feelings of it, but they're not like coming out of it. Yeah. So I think you come out of it by part of it too is just asking yourself, what authentic or new part of myself am I bringing into my life? And what is different now? What changed, right? Because for any healing to happen, there has to be a change. Something has to change. Something's got to change. We can't heal and have nothing change, despite what people think. Healing equals change. Unfortunately, right? That is a little bit of a bummer to know that sometimes, but healing equals change, right? This is adaptation. This is growth. This is our authentic self getting more and more regulation of our life. If we're not changing, so the problem is people reset, they go through this connection, they have this experience, they're not sure what to think about it often, but when they reemerge, they kind of, because of not having a good support system, they're not able to make the change. So then they kind of fall back. And this is kind of how depression often becomes really entrenched in people because we're trying to do this, it's happening, but when we reemerge, maybe we don't have a support system or confidence, or we don't have other supportive people in our lives that are cheering us on or anything. So a lot of times when people do reemerge, they just kind of fall back. And we've all seen that with family and friends and people. This is easy to see with something like alcoholism, right? We see how people kind of heal and then fall back. But, we're all kind of, yeah, we all can be prone to doing this. I mean, yeah, full disclosure, like my biggest issue is like, I just worry too much about what people think, damn it. And it's like getting really old at this stage of my life. And so I'm kind of retooling myself. I'm in a little bit of one of these right now too. I'm retooling myself, and it's like I'm gonna have to like make some specific changes, and it's gonna rattle a couple of things here and there, right? That's bound to happen, but I'm trying to figure out how to do it in a gentle way without like getting like too aggressive because that's kind of what we do people like myself that don't like to offend anybody or say anything too much, we get passive aggressive, right? We get pushed so much that we're like, okay, all right, well, I'm gonna like have to say something now. So but I love listening to people speak and teach. There's, we've all seen a few people in our lives that are like very confident and very secure and who can communicate with great clarity in a very assertive way without being angry at all. And it's, the first time I saw it, I remember I was like, "Oh, what's that? What's that thing? I've never seen this before without anger or anything, right? I've never seen this degree of like clearly expressing how you feel, not being afraid to like express it and not worry about how people are going to respond and just it's like, whoa, what is that thing?" So, right, we all have little things we're trying to retool. So, anybody else want to relate their experience with their reset?
I would say mine used to be anger, and I feel so guilty after that I started actually really connecting with people and being more humble and seeing their soft side because it
Sure.
was like I just knew that I hurt people.
Yeah, sure.
So,
Yeah,
and I don't get angry anymore. I
yeah,
feel like I worked through it.
yeah. And yeah, our goal is right. I mean, I think anger is like the great activator. Like it serves a really good purpose to activate change and expression. But there are other ways to go about it though. So yeah, I'm trying to think of who is famous. Anybody think of who's famous that embodies this communication style? Anybody or a famous teacher of any kind? Kind of the thing. I think Keanu Reeves kind of does this a little bit. I'm a big Keanu Reeves fan. I think he kind of Morgan Freeman, maybe Morgan Freeman. Yeah, he's kind of like very good communicator and able to have intense conversations and just remain very just competent. I would call it competent.
Somebody else said that they're in one right now too, and that it's difficult to navigate finding time in their schedule to actually
Time.
do it.
Yeah, the challenging part is, I mean, I have did this. This is, yeah, that's a good point. With myself, I can also say in other people, I've purposely put myself here. I've arrived here just by just chance or timing. And I do feel like in the past a lot, I did not take enough time to devote because I was so busy with life. And right, that's another way our ego kind of tries to win out over this process, right? Like, too busy, I don't have time to do all this.
If you don't think about this, you can very sick.
Yeah, yeah. So oftentimes we just get sick, and that's why we end up back here again because the body just says, okay, the Constitution, right? It says this is enough. And then we do say, okay, we have time. I remember, yeah, I had, it was years and years and years ago, I had this episode of this illness that was so bizarre and like it literally forced me to stop. That was the whole point of it. Like it just forced me to stop and make some changes. And I just was not going to get better until I did for sure. So yeah. And just to remember also to be gentle on ourselves. That's a general healing rule. It's never good to be hard on ourselves, right? Never good to beat ourselves up. If the world tries to do it enough, we don't have to do it ourselves, right? So yeah, questions on this? This kind of ties into depression. It kind of ties into getting out of depression. It ties into, I always like the term to being a co-creator or a creator of our life, like to kind of embrace like kind of unlimited potential. But it is work. It is work for sure. There's always. So when people go through the reset, oh, this is a good point. This is also why I was thinking about this today. As herbalists, as healers, this is what we do. We, if people need like a counselor at this stage, we try to say, hey, you should talk to somebody. Or people need to, if it's apparent that people are having a religious, it's spiritual, like kind of crisis, we try to encourage them to seek some guidance there, or see other healer type people. But when people are in this, first of all, you don't do anything radical with plant medicine. You don't do anything radical. You don't do anything too strong or too aggressive. Typically, what I have found really helps people navigate this is clear mood uplifting herbs, and that's it. Maybe some nervines that are a little grounding and mood up. Don't even give them adaptogens, pure mood uplifting herbs. We go, especially, we'll talk about them here in a second, the spiritually really uplifting things like holy basil, St. John's wort. And what this does is it kind of helps people see through it all. It kind of helps them get out of the heaviness of this, the cloudiness, the bigness of thinking, and it gets them into a more uplifted state. That makes sense? So my experience, and I'll give you the special formula for it actually. Do you want it? Yeah. This is the formula. This is always some variation of this. I'm going to write this bigger. This is important to know. So you're in it, we're going to do some kind of variation of this. Doesn't have to be exactly like this, but these are kind of the key players. Holy basil, rose, prairie white sage. We could also do wild rose or prairie rose, right? Just any rose. This is a wormwood family, so we could also do other wormwoods like mugwort, something like that, right? We're going to do St. John's wort, one of the most really spiritualizing plants, uplifting plants that we have. Typically, we'll do a little hawthorn, a lot of heart herbs, right? Because this is a heart process. A linden, and sometimes just some general other nervines, anything will do. If it's really, this is becoming like a really intense process, blue vervain is also one that seems to always help people through this too. I'll usually do some kind of variation of this formula. So the rose for the heart and depression, hawthorn, linden for the heart, the holy basil, prairie white sage, St. John's wort, blue vervain. These are these kind of spiritual, uplifting plants that every kind of culture has really valued. So when people are in the stage, we're going to really support their heart. Very mood uplifting and maybe a little bit nervine. That's it. Don't do anything cleansing. We don't detoxify. We don't do stimulants. We don't do adaptogens. We just do this. That was a great question. There are some traditional Chinese formulas we use here a lot too, but this one is my bread and butter. In fact, if you're ever feeling really, really, really down and out, like this is like just a great, really bad depression, when you feel like just bad luck, bad depression, heavy, can't get out of something, this is a great formula to kind of break out of that.
Do you leave out the St. John's wort for people who are on other medications, or you just keep it low?
If they're on other medications, I always try to get some in there, even if it's just a few drops, if they're on like a antidepressant. But, or I'll put a little bit in. If they're not, I like to use a lot. Probably the main herb of the whole formula by volume. This is a really, maybe we'll taste this Saturday. I'll make this and we'll taste it Saturday.
This mix?
Yeah, it's really fun. I don't know. We might be able to make this as a tea. Maybe we could maybe do it as tea. We have everything, I think. Or I'll make it as a tincture. So, okay. So this would be like for a reset phase, or just you're in a funk. You lost your mojo. Austin Powers, you lost your mojo. Get your mojo back. Passion flower is a good nervine for this process, for sure. Wild oats is really good here. Milky seed, wild oats and milky stage.
Nicholas, if you use St. John's wort for the main part of it, but if there's someone who isn't, what would be the main one for someone who's only have a few drops?
Holy basil is going to be the main one then if you are on an antidepressant. Lemon balm would be one that always starts to show up here a lot too. We'll go through all these herbs, but I'll give you a couple really wacky formulas here the next couple of days. We can make it for somebody. Yeah, you'd have to email me or email the front desk. Probably email me. Okay. Okay, we good? Let's try to do all the antidepressant herbs. So this, I feel like everybody feels good with this. This makes sense to everybody. You've seen this, you've went through it, seen family and friends. Telling you, when you feel the pulses, they're just all gone. It just feels like nothing's there on all of them. When you see somebody a lot and you really know their pulses and you feel this, you can just tell right away. People, when they come in, they're going to talk to you and start losing it right away when they're here. Or they're going to be really talkative about it. So, I mean, you can tell when people are here, but the pulse is also just very definitive. This is, when we're in the reset phase, this is like where we should reach out to like positive affirmations, goal setting, because we're in a very neutral state and you can just like imprint that like right on your soul or your life. You can just neutral state, just rewire the whole system by putting out a real positive intent or affirmation. Okay. Okay. So let's stop the recording and we'll re-record for